Hi YouTube, Charlie Black 20 back once again. I'm doing another military battle review. I will be covering two battles which are very small for, again, the Texas Revolution. It is the Battle of Gonzales and the Battle of Goliad. The date of the first battle, the Battle of Gonzales, is October 2nd, 1835. Gonzales, this battle, is considered the Lexington of Texas, which is referring back to the American Revolution of 1775. And it's very similar in what was going on. The British in 1775 were going to the town of Lexington to remove the weapons and powder so that the colonists could not present armed conflict to the British regulars and the Crown. In this case, the Mexican government sent 100 Mexican cavalrymen to retrieve a 6-pound cannon that had been given to the settlement of Gonzales to fight off Indian attacks, which they now feared would be turned against their own troops because the Texan immigrants, which were mainly Anglo-American from the South, they were very worried that they would just turn them on the Mexican government instead, because the Mexican government had been basically overthrown by Antonio Lopez de Santana, who had started out as somebody who was in favor of smaller central government so the local governments could have more control, and had gone over to becoming way more centralized power, meaning that the power would be concentrated in a strong government of Mexico City and less towards locals, and would then became dictator and suspended the Constitution of 1824 for the Mexican Constitution. And this enraged a lot of Tejanos and Anglo-American Texans. So there was a lot of animosity between the Mexican government and the people of Texas. And when the Mexicans arrived at the village of Gonzales, they did demand the cannon, but at first the Texas representatives, the Gonzales representatives, like the elected officials and a few other well-known men of the town, talked with the leader of the Mexican contingent. His name was Francisco de Castaneda, C-A-S-T-A-N with the squiggle, E-D-A. I am not good at pronouncing names whatsoever, and when it comes to another language, I suck even more. So, Francisco de Castaneda. I'll go with that. Please, please, please correct me if I'm wrong. They waited for several days for the locals to hand over the cannon. They were told that there were problems with receiving it because it had been given to them as a gift, and that it was only the elected officials could do it, but the one that they needed to talk to was out of town. Basically, all these different delays, bureaucratic delays that were complete lies for the most part, while the Texans sent out messengers to other Texas settlements asking for help and asking for people to come and join them, because they weren't going to give over the cannon. And within the next 2-3 days, about 140 Texans arrived and elected as their company leader, John Henry Moore. And finally, the Mexican contingent under Castaneda demanded that the cannon be handed over, and the Texans brought the cannon forward, brought their rifles to bear, and held up a flag that said, "Come and take it," with a cannon on it. Very crudely made, but got the point across. And they opened fire on the Mexican camp, who, after a few hours of skirmishing, very, very light skirmishing, like they fled pretty quick, you had 2 Mexicans killed, and that was it. No Texas wounded, no Texas killed, no Mexican wounded, just 2 Mexicans killed. Both by rifle fire rather than the cannon, because the cannon, they did load it with like scrap iron and stuff, but it basically did nothing. It was a pop gun, basically. Dangerous, but not really effective. And that is what led to the Battle of Gonzales. basically little more than a skirmish in our minds, but just like Lexington, where 8 colonists were killed and 1 British soldier was wounded, it showed that the fighting had begun. There had been many other armed conflicts and quote-unquote uprisings before this, just like in the American Revolution. There were more skirmishes going on, but this was the final spark that just exploded the powder keg into the Texas Revolution, which leads us into the Battle of Goliad. Now, this battle took place on October 10th, 8 days later, in 1835. And Goliad was a Spanish mission, now under Mexican control. It was actually a finished mission, unlike the Alamo, which was never finished. This one is fully finished. And it's in the town of La Bahia. Please tell me if I'm pronouncing that right, but La Bahia. And it's garrisoned by about 50 Mexican troops when General Cos, who is Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna's brother-in-law, he's the military governor, he has about 500 troops there. He marches to the Alamo and to seize the town of Bejar and to start to establish control again over the Texas settlements. And several Texans, under the command of James Fannin and Benjamin Milham, about 125 Texans, head towards Goliad, trying to capture General Cos, partly so they could ransom him, and also so they could seize the silver that they had heard rumors he held. And Cos outmarched them. He got away before they were there. But when they did reach Goliad, they decided to demand their surrender, and also, if they refused, they would attack. Now again, this is 50 Mexican troops. The majority of those that were left behind, those 50 men, are convicts. Men who were imprisoned or got out of their crimes by joining the army. These are the dregs, you could say, of the Mexican army / society, whatever. They don't really have a full-on commander. It's kind of shared, but neither one wants to take responsibility. I'm not sure if their names are lost or not. I tried to find them. But at first, the Mexican soldiers do refuse the surrender because they don't want to lose their quote-unquote honor, but also because they have not received any help or word about what to do. They didn't expect this. And so Fannin and Milham launch an attack on the village and fort, and they kill 1 Mexican and wound about 3 others, while losing only 1 man wounded from their company. And the Mexican soldiers, after that, immediately surrendered, along with handing over the majority of their equipment and several cannons. I think the amount of equipment they left behind was about $10,000 worth, except that it's very poor quality stuff, like really bad muskets, old flintlocks, almost only a handful of really good rifles, although the cannons were a very welcome asset to the Texas Army that would be marching, that was gathering at that point to go to San Antonio de Bejar and lay siege to the town and the fortress, the Alamo, which was now held by General Cos. And but by seizing the village and fort of Goliad, it prevented supplies from coming up the coastline to Cos, which was a much shorter line and was also much safer. So by ship, Cos could no longer receive reinforcements or supplies at San Antonio, where he was now cut off except by a landward route, which was much longer, much more dangerous to not only attacks, but to breakdowns in communication and being attacked themselves by Texas revolutionaries. But the handful of Mexican troops that did hold Goliad, once they surrendered, they were allowed to leave and go back across the river to the city of Matamoros, which comes in later in the Texas Revolution, at least a little bit. But that's the Battle of Goliad. Both of these were little more than skirmishes of several basically small companies of Texans against a handful of Mexican soldiers. And this is what led to one of the things that really led to the Battle of San Antonio de Bejar, the Battle of Bejar. Siege and battle, you could say, as well as the cannons coming into the Texas Army that would later be used during the siege of the Alamo and the battle against Santa Anna when he arrives. So I know this is a much shorter video. These battles had much less to do, were much shorter. They were basically skirmishes, but they were very important to the strategic and political attitudes that would come to shape the Texas Revolution in the early days. So, Charlie Black 20 signing off. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll tune in for our next battle. Thank you very much.